Think we are ready to go. I want to welcome our guests this morning. We have Elena with us again. Nice to see you, Elena. And we also have Matt Boulanger, if I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, and his son Austin. So welcome. And we have online, we have Doug, who's still a guest, but not for much longer. We're looking forward to welcoming him as a member soon. This morning, we're going to start with a Rotary Minute from Vince.
Thank you, Susan. So we've had this topic a couple times before, but we do have some new members here. So I thought I'd talk about a little bit of history with the Paul Harris Fellow recognition. So just start out, Rotary was started by the vision of one man, which was Paul Harris. He started Rotary. He invited a number of businesses together, and on February 23rd, 1905, he had 3 other people with him in downtown Chicago, and they had the first Rotary meeting. So what is a Paul Harris Fellow? It's a person who's been recognized as having done something significant for others. The Paul Harris Fellow recognition acknowledges individuals who contribute, who have contributions made in their name of $1,000 to the Rotary Foundation. So the Rotary Foundation transforms your gifts into service projects that change lives both close to home and around the world. So it's a little different than your local club. It really is, when you go give to the foundation, it is a lot of some international causes, fighting polio, different things around the world. Since its foundation for more than 100 years, the foundation has spent more than $4 billion in life-changing sustainable projects. The mission of the foundation is to help Rotary members to advance world understanding, goodwill, and peace by improving health, providing quality education, improving the environment, and alleviating poverty. So while there were some Paul Harris Fellows started in the 40s, the program itself and the recognition started around 1957, and it really was to encourage and show appreciation for substantial contributions to what was the only program, this fellowship. Earlier in the recognition, they received a certificate. Today, they receive a certificate and a pin. They're also can buy a medallion. You don't actually have to be a Rotarian to either get awarded it or to provide it. So there have been people who have given $1,000 in the name of their spouse as a wedding gift and became fellows. There's also some, again, non-Rotarians. So it really started maybe 79 when it became non-Rotarians, and a person gave in the name of Mother Teresa, which was cool. Other fellows have been Jimmy Carter, Boris Yeltsin, James Lavelle, who's an astronaut, and Jonas Salk. The number of fellows reached about 1 million in 2006. It's currently about 1.5 million. And today we actually have a fellow in our midst today that we're going to be giving the fellowship to. This person has become a fellow multiple times, and the person's wearing plaid. Fellow, yeah, I did not say felon. So I would like to recognize Howard Novak for his fellowship, double sapphire. So Howard, if you come up. Thank you. Thank you. And you can say a couple words.
A couple words. Wow. Didn't know this was coming. I'm really poor at extemporaneous speaking, so I apologize, but
Howard, tell people about the grants you got and the trips you took.
thanks. A long time ago. Now, So what Sally's referencing is, some of you heard me talk about some dental mission trips that me and a buddy from school put together. And over the course of time, we put together maybe a dozen trips or so. Some of the people here have been on some of those trips. And as one component of the trips, we were doing dental services in some remote towns in Central and South American countries, and we needed equipment. And part of the collaboration was we got Rotary grants that allowed us to purchase some portable dental equipment, which expanded the range of treatment that we could provide for people. So it was a big boon for us to be able to come in with something other than just hand instruments and be able to provide real dental services for people. So Rotary's got a variety of funds and grant programs available that allow you to accomplish this. And the donations that are put in as part of the Rotary Foundation get matched in various ways by Rotary. And so the money gets multiplied. Each clubs and districts are eligible for these grants. And I would put it out there, if anybody's interested, they have a variety of things within our district where you can do a little minimal research and figure out a grant. And, you could decide, hey, I want to do a project, and collar a couple of us and say, hey, let's do this thing. And you can make it come together. So funds are available. This is how it happens. And appreciate the pin. I'll wear it. Just one more thing, if I could, real quick too. This club, social clubs like, or not social, but service clubs like this, they wax and they wane and they get bigger and smaller, and the club's at a relative high right now. And it's really cool to see. I'm just really impressed by everybody in this club. There's a lot of good spirit. People are intent on getting a lot of good things done. So kudos to you all.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, Walter, for all your years of dedication to Rotary. It's a well-deserved recognition. And now Walter is going to provide our inspiration.
Good morning. So two friends were walking together in the desert, and they began to have an argument, and one friend slapped the other one in the face. The one who got slapped was hurt, but without saying anything, wrote in the sand, "Today my best friend slapped me in the face." They kept on walking until they found an oasis where they decided to take a bath. The one who had been slapped got stuck in the mire and started drowning, but his friend saved him. And after he recovered from the near drowning, he wrote on a stone, "Today my best friend saved my life." The friend who had slapped and saved the best friend asked him, "After I hurt you, you wrote in the sand, and now you write on the stone. Why?" The other friend replied, when someone hurts us, we should write it down on the sand where winds of forgiveness can erase it away. But when someone does something good for us, we should engrave it in stone where no wind can ever erase it. The moral of the story is, it is easier to hold a grudge when you feel wrong, but never close your heart to forgiveness. Sometimes we are all too consumed with our own emotions that we are temporarily blinded by hate or grief, and negative emotions will only bring you down. Letting go of the past and valuing people that love you is the best way to live a rich and rewarding life.
Thank you, Walter. Yes.
There is a member of this club
Mhm.
who enjoys singing together.
Mhm.
And today it happens to be this young man's birthday.
Oh.
And we always sing happy birthday to Charlie.
Oh, Charlie, happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear Charlie. Happy birthday to you.
I knew his birthday was coming. And I had decided that on my birthday, it was gonna be my last meeting with this club. It was gonna be my last meeting because the price of breakfast went up $100 a year. The price of the dues went up. One of the things that Rotary wants to do is reduce the average age in our clubs. And if you can get rid of an 87-year-old, it reduces the average age pretty quickly. And I frankly very much missed the singing. I was shocked when we came back from COVID. Every meeting that we had from the time the club started until we shut down for COVID, we started the meeting with a song. And we came back and I led a song and the president of the club came to me and said, "We don't sing anymore." And I was like in shock. And over those things, I decided that I was going to quit the club. And then I looked around last week and I saw all these people that I love and I said, I can't quit. So I'm glad to be an 87-year-old member of this club.
We're glad to have an 87-year-old member of this club. Thank you very much. And on the subject of singing, today is the last day to respond to the survey about our weekly meetings, which includes importantly questions about singing. And so I noted in my email yesterday that I had 22 responses, which is good, but we have more members than that. And so if more folks can offer their opinions, I'd appreciate it, because we will be making some decisions very soon about that and other things. And so would love to best reflect the sentiments of the club. So if you can fill out that survey online, if there's anyone who for some reason can't access the survey online, let me know and I'll give you another way to share your thoughts. Okay. Just a few announcements.
Can I add one?
Oh, sure.
We send out a bulletin every middle of the month. If you are not receiving the bulletin, please send me an email, because maybe it's in your spam. But I do notice that some people, most people open it. I do see some people who have not opened it, and that's okay, because sometimes you read it with a screen or something. But if you're not getting it, just please send me an email just to make sure that your email is correct.
Thank you. On September 14th, we are going to try something different in terms of the location of our meeting. We're going to hold our meeting at Williston Place, and our speaker is the marketing director of Williston Place. In advance of that meeting on September 7th, some of us are going to go over and have a Rotary informational meeting for the residents there, because a number of them are interested in learning more about Rotary and possibly getting involved with volunteering with us, or perhaps even joining. So thank you, Jen, for arranging the speaker and suggesting that we try something different by meeting over there. And that when we meet over there, we may be joined by some of the residents there who will get to see what a Rotary meeting is like. So it's going to pose some, challenges in terms of, making sure the technology works and the breakfast and all that. But I think we're on the way to a good plan to do that.
My phone tells me it's at Blair Park.
It is, yeah, it's
okay.
it's an easy place to find.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll provide lots of directions and all that to make it easy. Sherry has some extra fare tickets.
Yep,
There's
3 extra fare tickets if anybody's looking to go to the fair. Yeah, I know some people only got 1 ticket, so if you want another ticket, or if you didn't get any ticket, let me know. They're right here for grabs. So today don't use your tickets, just take canned food and get in free. But anyway, there's still 2 more tickets here, guys.
all right.
Yeah. We got all weekend.
I want to check, did everyone receive the budget from Jeannie? Okay, all right. All right. Well, if you've had a chance to look them over, have any questions, be sure to reach out to me and or Jeannie and we'll be happy to respond to them.
I didn't see the budget.
Okay, I'll check with Jeannie. Maybe it didn't go out to everybody.
Hi,
In which
guys.
case we will get it out.
I'm
This week.
here and
Hi,
it
Jeannie.
did not go out. I'm like, oh, was I supposed to send it to everyone? But it'll go out this week. Sorry about that.
No, that's my fault. That's my fault. Yeah, all right.
No
Yeah,
worries.
so we can send that out and then take a little time to look it over. The charities budget in particular is organized differently. Hopefully, will look nice and clear to folks, but I'm sure there'll be some questions. So we'll get that out to you this week. And then the last thing, we are contemplating having another booth at the Isham Farmers Market. We've had 3 booths so far, 1 at Richmond and twice at Isham. And Elizabeth has offered to organize that if we have enough interest to staff the booth next Tuesday. So is there a show of hands of folks who might be willing to put in a couple hours at Isham Farm?
Let's say what we need. Ideally, we have at least 6 people, 3 who can come early to set up, so that would be 4 o'clock, and then 3 who can be there late to take down, and that would be 8 o'clock. And someone has to bring the stuff back to the storage unit, which is access storage on South Brownell, and I have the information on all of that. So keep that in mind. I'll send an email out too. But if we get enough people, I think it would be fun.
What day is it again?
Tuesday.
And the weather looks good, which is important, not only for our benefit, but
If
you know-
we want to make it a regular thing through the end of, I think if they go through the end of September, then if we have people who can volunteer each week, I think it would be worthwhile. It's a nice location. We all had fun the past couple weeks being there. So let me know.
thank you. All right, without further ado, Ted, you can, there you are, introduce our speaker.
So, couple comparisons here. I don't know if people know this, but the original choice to play Rocky in the movies was not Sylvester Stallone. It was actually Ryan O'Neal, believe it or not. And I don't know how that would have worked. William Shatner was not the first choice for Captain Kirk. My wife had just broken up with a guy who had a fellowship in cardiology. And ended up with me, a mall Santa Claus at the time. And of course, and Abraham Lincoln was everybody's second choice at the 1860 convention. That's how he won. I say that because Matt Boulanger is our substitute speaker today, because my original speaker failed. But just as Kevin Bacon was the second choice for Footloose, we're gonna be very thankful that my original choice backed out at the last second. Matt is not known for dancing like Kevin Bacon is in that movie, but he does have to be very nimble, because he's, as you probably remember from his past appearances here, he is the town planner. And that is an extremely difficult job that he does incredibly well. There's a lot of controversy, well, maybe not a lot, but there's enough controversy right now with how Williston is growing and the choices that have been made. There's a lot of misinformation out there. I've had people come to the select board, and Terry can vouch for this, who think that the select board chooses who gets to put what at Taft's Corners. We have enough steakhouses, like the, you know, I agree with that. But I'm always amazed that, you know, people think that the select board can go, you know, I don't know, another bank, all those in favor? No, I'm sorry, no bank, no. Yeah, we know that's your property. We know that, but we don't care. But anyway, the town is going through growing pains to some degree. Our planning process is quite good. It balances the public need with the economic concept that the market is never wrong. Your property is worth what somebody will pay for it. It's worth what you can make it productive to do. But at the same time, the town citizens have a need to have growth that is the kind of growth that we want, the kind of growth that is responsible and that is sustainable. Matt Boulanger does an incredible job, both with the nuts and bolts of planning, staffing the Planning Commission and the DRB, but also has added responsibilities with form-based code, which have given his position a lot more nuts and bolts operational authority. But he also is helping craft our next town plan, which is the plan that will guide the town for the next decade. And it is extremely important work. It is one of those things that local government does that most people don't think about. And Matt is just an incredible resource for the town. So without further ado, Matt Boulanger.
Thank you for having me. All planners are to some degree or another frustrated architects, so I can only assume the first choice was an architect. And thank you for that really complimentary introduction, Ted. It's nice to hear those things. You know, the planners, both myself and the staff I serve, certainly do experience sort of the tip of the spear when it comes to some of the conflicts Williston faces related to growth. And everything Ted said about you know, what we're working on and what are some of the issues of the day are true. We don't say how many banks or how many steakhouses. We do say what new buildings need to look like and what new sites need to be like when somebody wants to build a bank or a steakhouse. And going back to a prior set of development standards, a really good example of that would be a building like Union Bank at Zephyr Road and Route 2. Yes, it's a bank. Yeah, it even has a drive-through around the back, but it's a two-story building that supports multiple commercial tenants and is highly adaptable to a number of other uses should a bank not want to locate there at some point. And that's a little bit about the kind of thing Williston is doing when it engages with development and development pressure, is setting standards that mean that what gets placed in Williston will have a nice long lifespan and a useful lifespan, and be flexible as times change and economic realities change and all of those things. And I've talked about a little bit of that here before. Ted also mentioned our current efforts around the town plan. Our public engagement is really going to be going through really until the holiday season is when we're really focused on this. And I know I was gone for the last 2 weeks on vacation, so I've just been catching up with my staff. Some of you folks may have spoken with my staff related to service committee and possibly being able to help us bring people to some of our planning events should they have a transportation need. And that's something we're really trying to do, is not just say, hey, come to town hall on Tuesday night and, you know, talk to the planning commission, but hey, come see us at Isham Farm or the community room at Finney Crossing, and we'll come to you and talk about planning. So we're looking at doing that. We're looking at putting our planning commission and other board members to work, doing some door knocking in neighborhoods that we don't typically hear from a lot, to say, hey, we really want to hear from you about what that big to-do list that is a town plan should say for the period of 2025 to 2032. So that's all going on. I wanted to speak for a little while about some of the ways Williston relates to the broader region and the state, and some things that are happening with the legislature right now as we get ready for the next session to kick off, and then just open it up for some general Q&A. But like most of you, I don't live my whole life in Williston. I live in South Burlington. My son goes to school in South Burlington. My wife works in Winooski. Sometimes my wife works in Montpelier. I shop in Colchester sometimes. We live in a region and we live in a state, and most of us conduct our lives in a broader region than just the town that we live in. You know, when I was a planner out in Montana, it was a real shock, being a New England kid, to go out to Montana and find out that there are no towns. Everything happens at the county level or the state level. or the city level. And then sometimes the city takes a chunk of the county and just annexes it and it becomes part of the city. All of this was completely foreign to me, having come from Moncton, Vermont. And I love Vermont and I love town government. I work in town government. But we do try to achieve some very challenging things on some very, very small scales here in New England. And we run into that in Vermont and in Williston. And when I get together with other planners, which I often do through the Vermont Planners Association, which I serve on their executive committee and their legislative committee, we talk a lot about things we're facing, problems we're facing. And often the conversation turns to, if the state could just coordinate this, we could really achieve some things. And statewide planning in Vermont has a really kind of interesting history. If you were around back in the mid 70s, you might remember the Vermont Capability and Development Plan. But the short version is there was an attempt at statewide planning, and a map was published and put in a whole bunch of Vermont newspapers that said, here's what we think. Here's where we think Vermont should grow. Here's where we think natural resources or farmland should be preserved in Vermont. Well, what happens when a map of the whole state is published like that? Everybody looks for where their house is. And nobody liked what they saw because the plan anticipated engaging with the reality that there would be growth and change. And the politics that sort of precipitated out from that really meant that by the early 1990s, there was almost no statewide planning or coordination in Vermont. And that's still kind of where we are. And that's some of the situation that has meant since 2017, the efforts to do things like Reform Act 250, the statewide development regulation law, have been really challenging. It's been really challenging to take on that statewide law without the foundation of some statewide planning underneath it. And that effort is continuing. In the last legislative session, many of you may have either followed a bunch of the news articles about housing challenges in Vermont, housing crisis in Vermont, and the bill called S-100, which was the legislature's response to housing crisis, which was mostly in S-100 to limit the way municipalities could regulate the creation of new homes, particularly in areas that are served by water and sewer. So there are some preemptions, some things that we used to be allowed to do as a town, some densities we used to be allowed to control that we are not allowed to control at the same level now because of S-100, under the theory that there are places that are good for housing, and communities that have those places should allow housing of various types and densities in those areas. So that's a reality we live with. Frankly, the impact on Williston is not that great. Most of what Williston allows is already in alignment with what S-100 said towns have to allow. We're ahead of the game, and that speaks well for the town and the way it has dealt with those challenges. But there's a couple other things that came out of S-100 that are happening now and will be showing up in the next session. One of those was that there wasn't a lot of progress made on changes to Act 250 that would be supportive of the creation of housing in places where it's appropriate to do that. Again, Act 250 is just this big tangled thing. It's really hard to engage with. We don't have that statewide plan behind it where we can say, well, if we just adjust it to meet this plan, everything will be great, because we don't have that plan to reference. But what we do have, the closest thing to that is the state designations program. In Vermont, and in Williston, there can be designated village centers, designated growth centers, downtowns, new town centers, and neighborhood development areas. Williston has 2 of these. We have a designated village center here around Williston Village, and we have a designated growth center around Taft Corners. And those are designations that municipalities have to apply to the state to receive. The application is reviewed by a public body called the Downtown Board. That's a statewide board. It includes citizens, professional planners, and state staff. And those designations are reviewed for progress every 5 years or every 8 years, depending on the type of designation. So with Williston's Growth Center, every so often we have to provide a performance report to the downtown board that says, yes, we are focusing development in this area. We are supporting it with infrastructure. Our land use controls are appropriate. We're not building in the growth center and also building everywhere else. We've actually made some choices about that, those sorts of things. And so there is a map, very different from the map that everybody got so upset about back in the 70s, but there is a map of the state you could go look at, and you can see all of these designated centers. And having a designated center for a municipality allows the municipality to have some access to some funding mechanisms that it wouldn't otherwise have. In the case of a village, it allows commercial property owners to access some tax advantages for money they spend on upgrading historic structures, keeping them relevant and useful. And there are some minor exemptions or adjustments to the way Act 250 works when you're in a designated center that are advantageous to the development of things, you know, especially like housing. And that designations program is getting to be about 20 years old. And in S100, there's a recognition that probably to provide homes that meet the needs of the state and the region, the place to do that is going to be in and around these designated centers. So it's a big horny issue, you know, tough to tangle with, not sure where to start. So what happens with the legislature, something like that? Summer study committee. And that's where we are. So I'm participating on behalf of the town and Vermont Planners Association in what's called the designations study. We actually have a meeting with, we're bringing all the other planners who are interested in later today. And then there's a bigger public event on September 12th down in Randolph to get people together to talk about designated centers and design and what could happen at the state level to help these communities that have these downtowns, growth centers and village centers, et cetera, achieve these statewide and regional goals, because this is really probably where these things are going to be happening, where our economic development is going to happen, where our housing goals are going to be achieved. But we could use some more help from the state, frankly, around those issues. So that's one summer study committee. The other one is more directed at Act 250 itself. The idea has been out there since the 2017 Act 250 reform began, that perhaps in communities that have good performing designated centers, those might be places where Act 250 would no longer apply. In other words, is the local way of handling development doing and meeting the criteria and goals that Act 250 sets out to meet? And are we just having a duplicative process that increases the amount of time it takes to achieve a permit, that the cost of achieving a permit, increases the risk of appeal for an applicant? All of those things are, you know, drags, particularly on the production of housing. And so if you were to look at a Williston and say, well, you know, here's Williston zoning, here's that new form-based code, here's everything Williston's doing about planning for infrastructure at its growth center, maybe the Act 250 criteria are being met just when someone comes in and meets all of the Williston criteria, which is true. Act 250 always wants people to go through our local process first. And what we see from Williston is we go through that local process and review, we come up with a conditioned approval. Then they go off, the applicant goes off and goes to Act 250 for 6 or 8 months. They pay, you know, 10, 20, 40, $100,000 in application fees. They spend those 6 to 8 months. They wait out their appeal periods. And the project that results is exactly the same as the one that we approved in Williston. They don't come back and say, well, Act 250 said we had to do this, that, and the other, and now we need to amend our project. They usually come back and say, okay, we finally made it through this other process. So when we're thinking about housing, when we're thinking about even something like transitioning out of the hotel program, which was, you know, the sort of story of the day back in May and June as the session ended, and you're saying, well, we want to move people into permanent supportive housing. We want people to have options to move into a home. A person I know who works for the state said, you know, to transition someone out of homelessness effectively, you need to get them into a home for 3 years. That's the amount of time with supportive housing it takes to take someone who's you know, truly been unhoused and stabilize everything that they need. And so the longer it takes us to create the homes, that people can get into, the longer we're delaying that track to a more stable situation. And so there's the growth centers and other centers study, and then there's really very tightly aligned with it, this Act 250 study that says, are there ways that making those things a little easier while still achieving all those goals, we can have homes created on a faster timeline. You know, the same person who told me about the 3-year time limit said, Matt, if you were in Vermont, what would you do with $100 million a year? What, if you needed to create homes, what would you do with $100 million a year? I said, well, I do the math, $150,000 a unit. If I'm stingy, I'd build a bunch of housing. She says, well, that's what we're paying to run the hotel program. And so, there really is a need to be able to respond to what we're facing with a much more permanent solution. Spend that money once, get the housing built, don't spend it every year over and over again. So temporary solutions are temporary, and they're also really expensive. So we'll be watching both of those. We'll be seeing what shows up possibly as more legislation in the next session come January. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but what I do know from participating is all of the people like me and all of the people who work on these issues and the people who regulate development at the state level are all coming together to work with this and assist the legislature in crafting some changes that might make this situation a little bit better. So, my takeaway as I continue to work in my role here in Williston is, I come in the morning and on my desk is just a pile of Williston challenges, right? It's this crosswalk or this street or this subdivision that needs a comment or this historic building, and we need to decide if a certain change to it is okay, or somebody's got water in their lawn that they never had before and they're convinced it's from the development uphill, et cetera. It's easy to get siloed. But every challenge we look at, homelessness, climate change, transportation, jobs, economic development, resilience, stability, they're regional, if not statewide, if not region-wide New England challenges at least. And it's important to continue to think that way and to think about the ways that Williston relates to the broader region that we're a part of, and do that in our planning, do that in the way that we interact with the state and even sometimes the federal government when we're thinking about things like transportation or other kinds of funding. So that's what I'll sort of leave you with. As much time as you have, I have time to answer Williston and beyond questions. I don't know when they're going to mow the lawn at Friendly's, but I'll just get that out there, or what's going to happen to it yet. But I'm happy to go wherever folks would like to go for as long as you'd like to go there.
So this is not a Williston question, but I bet you know the answer. I grew up in Brattleboro and went to college here and came to know the state better. And when I first came out of the southern part of the state, we used to laugh and say, well, Chittenden County's great. It's almost in Vermont. And so my question is, when decisions are made or requirements are set for designated centers outside of Chittenden County, are the same standards, same restrictions, the same requirements applied there as here? Because counties outside of Chittenden County are very different.
Yes and
I know
no.
that.
Yes and no. Even Act 250, if you talk to the development community, is administered quite differently, and the criteria are interpreted quite differently depending on what district you're in. And that's been a complaint for some time, that there's a less consistency than especially applicants would like to see. So say, oh, if I'm in District 4, they're really going to rake me over the coals over deer wintering area, but if I'm somewhere else, they might not. So that's Act 250. As far as the designations go, I think there's quite a bit more consistency there, but part of the study is to look at the statutory criteria for the designations and think about, is that working? Is that serving the needs of the state? And Williston's Growth Center in Taft Corners in 2006 was the very first growth center ever approved. And there's some really interesting history there. A growth center is a designation you can only get if the growth that you're anticipating in your town over the next 20 years will not physically fit in an existing downtown or village center. So, Williston looks around and says, with the development pressure we're experiencing, especially the commercial development, there's no way we're going to fit that all in the village. We wouldn't want to try. There's still a picture in the back of town hall when UVM Landscape Change Program modeled a Red Lobster restaurant on the main drag in the village. And I'm sure nobody wanted that. They had a little miniature inflatable lobster on the roof of the building. It was really terrific. And they showed the Slate Barn property turning into a strip mall. And nobody wanted that. So okay, we can't fit all of the anticipated growth in our existing village pattern. We don't have a downtown to focus on. If we did, we would probably be asked to do that and maybe put a growth center around the perimeter of it. But there was this adjacency requirement. There was this idea that if you're going to have a growth center, it ought to be supportive of what's happening in your traditional village center. And so for a while, the two designations were actually mapped so they touched down by where Southridge Road came out onto Williston Road. And the downtown board said, yep, they got to touch. That's what statute says. And we said, well, we don't really want to grow in a continuous strip from the village to Taft Corners. We actually want some separation. We want to feel a transition between the two, which I think has been actually achieved pretty well. But when you look at the map of growth centers, I think that's been a real challenge. Are they actually supportive of an existing downtown or village center, or are they kind of, like Severance Corners in Colchester? It's kind of its own thing. That's another growth center. The other thing is, if you look at that map of designated areas, and every time I talk to the director of the CCRPC, Charlie Baker, there's a map behind him of Chittenden County, and there's this big red blotch, and it's like way bigger than any of the other big red blotches on the map. And that's the Williston Growth Center. It's 840-ish acres. It's quite large. And that's a different sort of consistency. Most of the other growth centers are small. Village centers and downtowns by comparison are often tiny. And there was a pretty vigorous debate in 2006, 2007 about that size of the growth center and whether it was bigger than it should be and whether it should have been smaller and focused that next 20 years of growth in a tighter pattern around the intersection. So those are some of the things that I think we're going to talk a lot about. We're in the last 5 years of the 20-year growth center designation now for Taft Corners. And when I look back at that concern about compactness, I tend to look at it and say, yeah, I think we could have set the boundary a little tighter and fit physically what came over those 20 years in a smaller boundary. If I'm looking forward another 20 years, I would say, well, yeah, don't make the boundary any bigger, but probably where it is okay. Does that answer some of that? Great.
I have a question about the form-based code.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that one of the issues in the form-based code was requiring that we not develop 5 corners with all the flat roof buildings, that buildings had to have pitched roofs.
Mm-hmm.
The picture in the Observer of the first building approved under the form-based code had a flat roof. Is there a conflict there?
So the picture that was shown, this was 2 weeks ago, of the Hotel at Finney, it's a perspective looking down up at the building. It actually does have a pitched roof. And
you saw the picture.
I saw the picture because it was quite a washed out color picture from the one they had handed me. So I was actually on my vacation, looking at the Observer, which I found out, by the way, you can't go to in Europe. I was in Ireland for a while, and I went to check back in on it. I got the warning page that said, sorry, we don't meet the EU standards. You can't go. So then I was completely disconnected. It's probably the only person who's ever tried to do that. But I was looking at that rendering anyway. And so when they do the 3D rendering and you're standing on the ground, you don't see it. But we heavily incentivize pitched roofs. It needs to be between a 512 and a 1412 pitch to qualify. There's, I think, one element of that building that has a pitched roof that's below slope, and therefore instead we require a big cornice parapet. But when the Planning Commission talked about that pitched roof requirement, they were also concerned that it would run up against some energy goals around being able to place solar panels. So what we said was if a portion of a roof is going to be used either for rooftop open space or solar or for mechanical equipment, that portion may be flat. So you will see some flat roof buildings, but you will also see some pitched roof buildings under that development standard.
I have a question.
Yeah.
A quick one. Not to interrupt you. Are they gonna do a traffic light where the state police barracks is being placed?
Not currently, no.
Not currently, no.
So the DRB was very concerned about that in reviewing the project. Obviously, it's a state project on a state highway. We don't get a lot of pull there. The warrant for starting to think about a traffic light is 75 trips. So if you're predicting 75 trips during the PM peak hour, the busiest hour of the day between 4 and 6 PM, Monday through Friday, then you start to study for a signal. Yeah, so they were below that with the barracks plus the park and ride. There are 3 other developable lots around the park and ride that are still privately owned. My prediction would be you couldn't put much on any of those without having to go back and study for a signal up there. But the current plan is not for a signal at that upper entrance to the park and ride.
Thank you.
But in
Rick?
response to that, Chris, the exit for that is up at the top of the hill. It's
Yeah.
not, the entrance is at the bottom closer to Taft's Corners, but the exit is at the top of the hill, so further away from
Yeah.
a lot of the traffic. So hopefully the flow won't be, getting out won't be all that.
All they need to do is get rid of the guys holding the stop and then.
Yeah.
Soon.
ECI that's doing the work, and I get caught in that traffic all the time, and I'm messaging boyfriend, like, what is going on? So it's paved now, so it's almost. I think we have time for one more question.
Rick, you've been.
Right. Oh, okay. Early in your talk, you talked about the bank and being easily developed into another use in the future. Of course, we have a lot of big boxes, which is kind of the opposite of something that you can easily convert to another use. And right now there are 2 big boxes that are vacant. And which is, I think we've always had one that seemed to be vacant. Now we have 2. What's the future look like for those spaces and big boxes in general?
Spirit Halloween. That's what Bed Bath & Beyond will be for the next couple months. So I think it's great that there's 2 right now to talk about because I think there's some distinctions there. Bed Bath & Beyond is really challenging. If it's not another 36,000 square foot single tenant retailer, maybe it's 2 sharing the space. But that sort of developed form is really, really hard to adapt into much else. If it was really, really devalued, you could start to see somebody looking at things like indoor recreation as a reuse of a building like that. My guess is we'll have a retailer that's not in the market that is interested in being there. And the distinction I'd make is to Christmas tree shops. A couple things about it. It's smaller. It's less than 3/4 the size of the Bed Bath & Beyond, and it's part of Maple Tree Place. It has some building frontage on the parking lot side. It also has some frontage on the pedestrian way on the promenade, which is kind of cool. There's some maybe ability to come in with some storefronts off of that promenade, and so that space in general, I think, is a little more adaptable if it does need to go smaller, and it's smaller to begin with. But I don't have any inklings yet of what will permanently go into either. I've got a piece of paper on my wall with squares, and we've been fundraising for a pizza party at our office with buying squares for $2 to predict what goes in. The Bed Bath & Beyond and Spirit Halloween is the free space in the middle, so that's now got an X on it, but we'll have to see. I'm really not sure.
Well, thank you. I know we could probably ask 100 more questions. So interesting to know where our town is headed in all these ways, but thank you, Matt, very much.
Appreciate it. And you all know where to find me when you have those questions. So thank you.
You know what you need to do. Right?
I know what I need to do. Let's hope it's not one of these ones in my pocket. All right. I have 482-8616. 616. There we go. All right. Here you go. Thank you.
All right, Marty, turning it over to you.
Right, so I'm so sorry Armin's not here, because I wore this shirt specifically to compete with Armin. I know, it's a sorry attempt, I have to say. Anyway, so let's see what we can collect this morning. Debbie, why don't you start it off?
All right, thank you. So I have a $1 here for the speaker who is leaving. I started my community service actually years ago, volunteering for the planning commission. So I have had, and then it's gone on from there. And so I have a special place in my heart for all the planning that goes on in Williston. Secondly, I wanted to give $1 for all the speaking of community service, all the people who work at the polls all across America. Because yesterday, the 2 women in Atlanta